some of your reports have been quite startling, frankly. You're seeing Ukrainian soldiers who, just 3 months ago were civilians. They were civil servants, they were lawyers, they were doctors fighting against the might of the Russian army. That's what struck me. But tell us maybe some of the stories that have touched you, Debora, as you've been reporting on this.
And that's a lovely question, Bongani. I think there's a couple of things. The first is just the other day, I went on a kind of a tour of a battlefield area with a man who's a millionaire. He is a millionaire still, and he's used his millions to fund a battalion and to help the war effort. And there's this man who was skiing in Austria when the war broke out, 2 days later back here in Ukraine, and starting his own battalion and fighting on the front line. And there we are running through Lizova, where his troops are in all different positions there. The Russian border was about 2 miles away, and they're enduring gunfire. And the people in his battalion, I spoke to a history teacher. Now he is literally living history. And I think that's the sort of bizarre disconnect. But there's these images that keep coming, because in that same area, just a few miles down, was what looks like a suburban area. Think Parkhurst. And there were tanks. Right. There is a warfare being fought in suburban backyards. But as I said at the beginning, Bongani, for me, what it is always about is how war affects people. A child stuck in an underground bunker for 83 days when we spoke to him. A little boy who draws monsters and tanks. A child who should be in school, who shouldn't have to endure shelling night after night after night. A woman whose husband, the love of her life, was buried twice. His body had to be exhumed because prosecutors are investigating his death as a war crime. I mean, can you imagine the horror of they just hastily buried him because there was so much shelling, they couldn't give him a proper funeral. And then the prosecutor's office came and he had to be exhumed. And then they had another second burial, the grief over and over again. And I was here in April when the atrocities in Bucha, the first we came to understand just how reprehensible some of the actions have been of the Russian forces, were uncovered, and seeing the bodies of ordinary civilians with their hands bound behind their backs. Mothers who spoke of, I mean, these stories have stuck with me. A mother who was tied to a chair and forced to watch her little boy being raped. Oh. Can you imagine the horror of this kind of thing? A mother who pleaded with soldiers to take her into another room as they raped her in front of her child. Those kinds of things are the pain and the scars and the wounds that this nation will have to deal with. So even when Kyiv was liberated, it was muted, the celebration, because just down the road was Bucha and Irpin and the horrors that were unfolding there.
It seems nothing is sacred, nowhere is safe there. The Russian offensive has spared nothing, not schools, not hospitals, not churches. You know, we're far away, and it's easy for me to throw numbers like 8 million people have been displaced, 6 million have fled. But what's it like for those who have not been able to leave, trying to navigate even those liberated cities? What pieces are they picking up, Debora?
Well, often there's no pieces to pick up because their homes are just reduced to rubble. And that's really the point you've raised there, Bongani, is that behind every broken window, every shattered wall is a family who lived, who laughed, who celebrated life, who had hopes and dreams that have now been shattered. And a lot of people, interestingly, and I always wonder what I would do in a similar situation, they don't want to leave their homes. The shelling's coming. It's getting closer. We were following refugees who were being evacuated from Bakhmut, which is now under terrible shelling in the east. And the person in charge of the evacuation was saying that they were begging people to leave. And they don't want to leave their homes because they're scared that their stuff will get stolen. A lot of stuff is getting stolen, ransacked, or that there'll be nothing left to come to. But then the people who are evacuating them are saying, you've got to go because you might die if you actually stay here. And you see people clutching what they can grab. This is a country that is obsessed with their pets. Everyone's holding these little containers with dogs or little kittens or cats and trying to sort of flee with their animals and sometimes not being able to, or being killed as they try to flee. Because sometimes that's the risk that people take. Do you stay and risk being shelled in your own home? Do you flee and risk being shelled as you evacuate? Who should have to make that kind of choice? And these are the terrible things that people live with. And those who stay, I interviewed a woman the other day who stayed right on the border with Russia, constant shelling. The town's been liberated, so it's a little bit quieter, but the entire time I interviewed her, there was, shelling in the background, and she was picking up all the shrapnel that was in her garden. She was trying to plant a spring garden. And she told me she was too scared to hide in the basement because she had this fear that it was going to collapse on top of her. So she would hide in the bathroom. These are the choices people have to make. These are people who a couple of months ago were going about their business, doing their normal domestic chores, worried about the leaky roof or the mortgage having to be paid. And now this is their reality.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.